those operations to be able to work with files. In practice, you wouldn't be building the database file system on top of the file system in Unix, but for this assignment, we're looking for you to do something which is not quite as difficult as trying to define a whole file system from scratch yourself. So you, I assume, have had a chance to at least look over the two files that are in the assignment, and I hope that many of you saw the posting, Some Tips for Project One, which I published over the weekend, which was intended to give you some tips about Project One, good title, so that you would be able to have some kind of a head start on what you have to do and what you don't have to do in Project One. So you've given files on that you need to complete. This is, in most ways, the easiest of the assignments here, but if you're not familiar with how you use file system primitives or with C++, you've got a little bit of a learning curve, and this is why we're trying to go to a fair amount of trouble to make sure that every team has at least one person who's at least an M on C++ before getting started. And you're not just asked to do the program, the PF stuff, but you're also dealing with inserting of records on a page. And again, something that I will emphasize every time I do a lecture before the thing is due. There's the format in which the input comes in, which is a convenient improved format. And you know, it's not set up for you to be able to seek particular fields in constant time. It's just set up to be able to input the data. And there's the way that you store the data on a page, which we started talking about last time, and we'll talk about again today if we do discussion on those. And the requirement that you're being given in the assignment is, it should be something that finding a particular field in a record should take constant time. Finding the kth field, we talked about the 1776 field last time, finding the kth field should not take time proportional to k. Right, so that is the idea. You've all taken 101 and you understand how all of this stuff works. So take a look at that. Go to the lab sections. You can go to either or both. I didn't make them mandatory because sometimes there are people who feel that they don't want to waste time going to the lab sections, but you get a lot of help there, and at least one person, maybe more, from the team should go. Team dynamics are important. The other thing I want to hit you over the head with is, it's very easy to coast as a member of a team when there are hardworking other people on the team. There are two primary reasons why that's a bad idea. One is, failing exams, and the other is divorce. If you don't do the work on the projects, hint, there often are questions on my exams that relate to the projects. If you didn't do the project and you coasted based on somebody else's work, there's at least a decent chance you won't be able to do that well on the questions that are on the exams, at least some of them, which relate to the projects. And the other reason is divorce, because if you have a team of 2 or 3 people and one person is doing a lot of work and one person or 2 people aren't, then somebody will come to me and say, I want to be on a different team. And that's a huge amount of work for Saloni and me to try to do things, because putting the person who does a lot of work on another team usually isn't hard. But putting the people who aren't doing much work on another team ends up being difficult. In other words, if you're the coaster, you're messing yourself up in this class 2 different ways. And if you don't know C++ that well, you still can do a lot of work on the project and be a good teammate. And that's an important thing to do, so please try to do it. So again, you need to have the teams. I sent email to everybody who wasn't on a team this weekend, trying to form a team of 3 people. It looks like it might be a good match. I'll again go over the people whose names I called out at the beginning and see about making sure that we can get everybody on a team. Should have happened as of Friday or Saturday. Let's see if we can make sure that everybody who's staying in the class is on a team by the end of the day tomorrow, or in the lab section tomorrow at the very worst. And one other item that I didn't put on this page. Wednesday there's a strike. Again, a different set of people, and I'm very sympathetic to people who are asking for additional benefits. But fortunately, this is not a strike during finals. Last quarter, it was during finals. It didn't hit me. I had 2 finals on the same day. But fortunately, I didn't get hit with the strike during the final. But Wednesday, we have a class. And so we won't have the class on Wednesday in the classroom during a strike. I've tried that. I've come to class, I've managed to park, and all the rest of it, even passing the picket lines during the strike. There are students who can't make it to class because they require public transportation, and union drivers won't, pass the picket lines, which again, I understand. So what I almost certainly will do, unless the strike gets settled, by early tomorrow, is I'll set up a Zoom, not Hangout, because Hangout has a limit, which is too small. I'll set up a Zoom conference for this class on Wednesday. And so I will set up things so that that will be available, and I also have office hours on Wednesday for this class. So if somebody wants to talk to me, send me a message and I'll work out having a hangout with you during what normally would be my office hour. So again, the class will almost certainly be via Zoom, and if somebody wants to meet with me during what would have been my 2 to 3 p.m. office hour for this class, instead send me a message and I'll arrange to do a Google Hangout with you and talk to you about whatever your question is about. So just getting that out of the way. So we're just going to skip through. What happens in terms of caches? You don't normally think that much about what's going on with caches. The operating system takes care of that for you. You don't explicitly request that data be brought into cache. When you touch a page, and if it's not in your cache /buffer pool, it gets brought in. And what I wanted to emphasize now is the same is true of L1, L2, L3, these things which are on core, on CPU, on motherboard stuff. We talked about the notion of locality is ping, and that being in DRAM isn't good enough. How local you are to the computation has something which is an order of magnitude effect on how things work. And it's not that you explicitly say, bring this into L1, bring it onto the core. The most recently touched stuff is available to you on the core. It's not explicitly asked for. The database doesn't like the idea that the operating system is making the decision about what's being brought in. So instead, it ends up taking over that, or has in the past in practice. The database is friendlier with the operating system than it used to be before, but there are still things where the database may try to take over functions directly or indirectly, knowing what the operating system does and trying to psych out the operating system by making the right things happen. So it cooperates with the operating system, but it tries to use it to make the right things happen. There's a question.
Never mind, you answered it.
Okay, so that's all that's going on. So again, a file is a collection of records. We're going to be talking about a record rather than a row or a tuple most of the time in this class, but think of them as being synonyms. And we'll be talking about there being a record ID or RID. A lot of this course will be talking about RIDs. And what you need to be able to do is to read records, change records. For, again, project 1, you only have to insert records, but don't worry, delete and update are going to follow in project 2. So we'll have to insert records. And also, even when there aren't any indexes, you can always look for all the records that are in a particular relation /table /file. Now, in practice, files can contain more than one relation. For example, you could intersperse employees within their departments. You could have department records and then have the employees in that department interspersed with it. A kind of first normal form kind of violation in how things are stored, not in the relations, but if you store all the employees together with the departments, it's easier to be able to match them up because you bring in the department, you bring in the employees in the department too. Maybe multiple pages required. But there's, the notion of logically how things are and physically how things are. And you may remember, since I just went over it in 182, this term, you may remember physical independence. There's the notion of what the relations are, and there's the notion of how they're stored. The database management system has a responsibility for being able to work with the concept of a relation. No matter how they're stored, you don't have to know, but it does affect performance like crazy how things are stored. But the relational database system encapsulates the notion of a relation so that everything works, and if one day things are stored in row form, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about in this course, and then another day they're certain column form, which I'll be talking about as part of the coda for this lecture, okay, the additional material in this lecture. The database system mediates that. You don't have to know your program still works. It's independent of how things are stored, and the database system has to make that work. And in particular, if one relation is stored within another relation, in other words, you have departments and then store the employees together with the department, the database system will know about some of the efficiency it can get as a result of that and make plans that are based on that. But if that's true one day and not true the previous day or not true the next day, you don't have to change your program. Performance gets affected, but correctness does not. Physical independence. So one of the things you can do is you can scan all the records in a relation by going through the file in which that relation is stored. Okay, and in this course, in your projects, you're only going to be storing a single relation inside a file, so it's going to be relatively easy. You can just go through all the records, /tuple/rows, I'll say records, all the records that are in a file, which is all the records that are in a relation. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Now, there was a great question about by heap, do I mean a min heap or a max heap, as in CMPS 101? No. A heap file is just records being stored, unordered, a heap of records just being put in a file, no particular order associated with it. You just got a bunch of records in the file, in our case, a single relation there, but no special organization associated with them. So, as usual in computer science, every word has 17 different meanings, and you have to be careful about which meaning you want. It can lead to some amusing puns, but when it comes to teaching, puns get in the way. I still make them, but I try to make them in cases where it doesn't confuse you. And so what you want to be able to do is, you have pages that are associated with a file. To begin with, you might have no pages, or maybe allocate the first one so there's some place to put the first record. And, as records come in, you might put them all on the same page. When you run out of room, get another page, and another page, and another page. It could be that you end up having, too many pages because you've deleted records, you've inserted records. You've got 1,000 pages that have records on them. Maybe you only have one record per page, and the record's only, 100 bytes, which is bad density. So you might condense it down and compact it down to a smaller number of pages that you have. But again, that's an operation that you do. Users don't have to know about it. It could be a background operation. It's a good thing to do, so you don't have to fetch as many pages to go through everything that's inside the relation. But it's all correct. But performance matters, efficiency matters in this course and in really doing database. So you might go ahead and condense them down, get rid of empty pages, or compact things down so that instead of having 1,000 pages, it's only 250 or maybe even 25 pages instead. Okay, so to be able to support record level things, we want to deal with page IDs, which you're going to get very easily in Project 1. Again, you'll have the session about dealing with the file operations and page IDs and page numbers, all pretty simple inside the lab sections. When you have a page, there are going to be 3 areas. This is not the only implementation, but there will be 3 areas that you have on a page. There will be the areas that you have records. There will be areas where you have free space. And there will be area where you have things that allow you to find records, sometimes called the directory on the page. So a page has a page ID, a record has a record ID, which, as I briefly mentioned last time, consists of 2 parts. A record ID consists of a page ID and information that lets you find the record on the page, which we're about to go into. It's called a slot ID, and we'll go into slot IDs soon. We came close to it last time, but didn't quite get into it. You also need to be able to have a way of finding fields within a record, and again, I will emphasize, gotta be in constant time. You don't want to have the time to find the kth field be proportional to k. It should be O(1), okay? And then you need operations that, create and destroy files, insert, delete, and update records, fetching a record with a specific RID. We'll be looking at indexes later, okay? And scanning all records. And to give away the importance of RIDs, which I briefly mentioned last time, but I'll repeat now. RIDs have to be permanent, meaning that even if you end up moving the record off the page where it was born into the great page diaspora and it goes somewhere else, the RID still has to be good, even though it's on a different page. And as we briefly talked about last time, why do you have to move a record off the page where it began? Because it needs more space when you have variable length fields. Could be that when it was, a field with 10 bytes, things fit on the field, it's variable length, and when it becomes 80 bytes, it doesn't fit on that page anymore, so you gotta move it somewhere else. But the RID still has to be good. Very important kind of concept. And why does it have to be good? I'll give you 2 reasons, one of which we'll come to early, another one we'll come to later. The early reason is because we'll have indexes. And the indexes basically allow you to be able to find all the students located in California, get the RID of all the students located in California. And you want that index to be good even when the record moves somewhere else. The other reason has to do with what we get into when we get into concurrency control and recovery. Question?
So does that mean you construct like a logical mapping within your directory of mapping what the...
Wait. Okay, straw horses that we're gonna knock down. Well, this is actually a good thing to use if everything is fixed length. Now, there is a notion that we're gonna be talking about of base, which is where its records start, and offsets. Last time I used the word pointer, it's not really a pointer. Every time I use the word pointer, it was always an offset. What's an offset? A position from the base going forward. So for example, basically the position in F3, the L's are lengths, and the F's are field numbers. Don't think of it as meaning fixed. It means field. F means field. So to find field number 3, you know where the record starts. How? I'm going to tell you soon. You know where that starts. That's the base. That's a position on the page. It's an integer. If the page is 4K, then it's going to be between 0 and 4K. 4K minus 1. If the page is a meg, then it's going to be a 0 and a meg minus 1, etc. We'll be mostly talking about 4K pages in this class. Realistically, pages these days are a lot bigger than that, something like a meg. So how do you know where field 3 starts? Well, you know what the lengths are. They're fixed. They're in the database catalogs. They're there. And so what you could do is figure out where field 3 starts by basically saying, well, I know how long field 1 is, that's L1. I know how long field 2 is, that's L2. I don't store those for every record, because it's the same for every record. Why do I want to store it every time? It's the same. It's going to be in the system catalogs that we're going to be talking a lot about. I don't have to store it once. So what I could do is take base plus L1 plus L2, and that's going to be the beginning of L3. And I'm adding offsets. The offset for L3, for field 3 rather, is going to be L1 plus L2, added to the base plus L1 plus L2. But it's silly if there are 1776 or 2000 fields to have to add up a whole bunch of numbers. So what happens is we'll store the starting point for each field, so we don't have to do all that arithmetic, because adding 1775 fields is going to be order of 1775. Finding the kth field is going to be order k. So if we store the starting point for each field, that is, it's offset from the base. We go base plus the sum of the values from 1 to 1775, which we store rather than calculate each time. And that way, by storing that extra value, we make this constant time to find the kth field. We know from the catalog where it starts, base plus the starting point for field 1776, which we got by adding once the length of the fields 1 through 1775. And we know what its length is. That's also in the catalog, so we know how to find that field. That's very easy when everything is fixed. So again, finding the ith field of the record doesn't require adding 1775 numbers, doesn't require scanning the record. You just go ahead and find it. These are two things that I'm going to skip and go into something that's a little bit better, but we're going to get better still on the next slide, which we got to last time. This is something where if you have variable length fields, instead of trying to do weird punctuation with $signs or stuff like that, we're getting close to something which is used in practice, where what we do is we store a number, which is the number of the fields that we've stored. I'll remind you where that number gets stored. And then you have offsets. They're not really pointers, so these arrows are not pointers. They're numbers, they're offsets within. And what they tell you is where field I ends. So how do you figure out where field I begins? It's one more than when field I minus 1 ends. But there is an exception. There is no field 0. We're doing counting from 1, not from 0. Sorry about that. Where does field 1 start? Well, you know the base, and you know how big an integer is. So if there are 4 fields, you've got an integer, 4 more integers. If you want to play with small int, you might be able to get away with it in some contexts, but let's just assume that what you do is you have 1 integer for the number of fields, and then If this number is four other integers which tell you the offset where each of the records ends. And so you know where F1 begins, which is the base plus how much it takes to be able to store 5 integers, 1 for the 4 plus the actual offsets. So that should be arithmetic that you can do even if you don't know C++, it's just simple C. Okay. And now, to be able to find where the fields are, again, F stands for field, not fixed. You know where each field starts, including field 1, since I told you how you find field 1. You know where it ends, because the offset tells you. Offset 3 tells you where field 3 ends. And you know what the length is. You get the length by taking ending position minus starting position plus 1. People often forget that plus 1. For example, if a field was in positions 9 through 12, its length 4. 12 minus 9 plus 1. Positions 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, simple calculation. And so you kind of have a kind of mini directory inside the record telling you where things are. And so it allows you to be able to find individual fields, but it's actually kind of ugly for nulls. There are hacks for dealing with that. I'm not even going to go into it. And it doesn't require all that much overhead. You just have to store information for how many attributes there are, how many fields there are, and then information about where each one ends. You have to do that on each record because, again, it could be variable length. We'll come to some cleverer stuff on this in a second. Okay. And just, again, briefly reminding you, one of the things that this allows you to do is deal with alter table, adding columns very efficiently. Because suppose that today there were 90 columns in the table, and tomorrow you want to add 2 more. You can do the alter table without having to touch all the records. And the reason that you can do that is every record tells you how many fields it knows about. So suppose I decide to add 2 more records where the idea is that the new field, 2 more fields. The 2 more fields are null. I mean, you don't have values in them yet. You can put values in them, but when you do the alter, it basically says treat all the things that I didn't know about before as null. So there will be records that get put in that have 92 fields inside them, but the old records that have 90 are still good. You know why? Because we'll treat all the fields that aren't there as null. All the fields that aren't there as treated as null. So if I have something where it has 90, then that means that since I'm supposed to have 92, the last 2 are null, and the columns are always added at the end. So having this format allows me not to have to touch the old records. I might have 1 million, 10 million, 1 billion records in my file. I don't want to have an alter require that I take the time to go through all of them. This representation allows me to add 2 new fields where the value is null. There are even games you can play with other defaults, but let me just talk about null right now. You add 2 fields with null, and you don't have to touch the other records. They're implicitly null. Was there a question? Maybe I answered it. Okay, and yes?
So this record is just 1 row, and these files are just one.
These fields.
These fields are just one column in.
Correct. Field equals column equals attribute. These are all synonyms in what we're talking about here. So that's exactly right.
And this directory is when you increase the number of columns, doesn't the directory have to get more space because it's right up against the fields?
No, the fields that aren't there, you know that they're not there because 90 is less than 92, and you treat the other 2 as being null. So basically, when something isn't there, you treat it as being a node. You don't have to put something in for every one of the fields because the alter allows you to treat the ones that aren't there as being empty. As I was walking on the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today, or how we should go away. In the case of the fields that aren't there, they're treated as simply null. Or again, there are cases where they're treated as having some other default value like 0 or minus 17 or whatever, but I'll focus on null question.
I think what he's saying is after you add a column and you insert the data on it, do you have to move the directories?
If I'm putting in a value on the 91st and the 92nd column, then the length will end up getting longer, and that's another reason why I might need more space for the record. But basically, I need to, same thing if I change something with variable length. So if I need something that actually has the 91st and 92nd fields, the record may require more space. And that's another reason why a record may need more space than it did before. So you may not be able to update in place in the existing record. Okay, so now a variation on the theme, and the one that I suggest you focus on for project one is the first one, although the second one has reasons why it's attractive. But you know, might as well just focus on the first one, which our solution will actually use. And it's the following: rather than have a hack about null, explicitly have an indication of whether or not something is null. And I told you last time, just having zero length for something that's null won't work, because if something's variable length, it could have length 0. 0 is a perfectly good length of something which is varchar 17. It's a legitimate length. So 0 isn't good enough for that. So instead, what you do is you have a collection of bits at the beginning of the record. So in your directory, you have a bunch of null flags. How many null flags do you have? One for each field. And if the flag is 1, it means that the value is null, which means that you don't actually have to have it stored, out there, because it's null. And if it's not 1, then you actually have a value that's stored over there. So what you're going to do is you're going to have things where you have the offsets for, again, all the fields. And the null tells you whether or not it's empty. And if it's empty, looking for the field isn't going to end up, particularly mattering. So for the fields that are not null, you have the same thing that I described on the other slide. You know where they begin and you know where they end. And by the way, to make things simpler, you might as well, have something where even when a field is null, you have a position that's here, even though it's not going to be relevant. So you don't want to play the game for null versus not null over here. So if there are 4 fields, you're going to have 4 things here, even if the bit is 1. How many bits do you need for the null? Well, depends on whether you want to do things on, byte boundaries or word boundaries. If you're doing things on byte boundaries, then you just divide by 8 and take ceiling. So if there are 12 fields, for example, 12 divided by 8 is going to be, taking the ceiling is going to be 2, okay? And so you only need 2 bytes. Of course, if you're doing things where you're storing stuff on word boundaries, which, can have some advantages, then you're dealing with 32 rather than with 8, because there are 32 bits in a word, 8 bits in a byte. So on the input, you're going to be dealing with things where it's bytes. On the storage, you might want to deal with things in words, because you want your integers to begin on word boundaries. Right, and these are going to be integers. So think about bytes versus words, and again, you'll want to think about this and talk about this when you're working on the project. So this is one of the places where the input format and the storage format may differ. The input format, it's just going to be given to you in bytes. So if there are 12 fields, you're going to get 2 bytes worth of data. But the last 4 bits don't matter, because it's 16 bits and only the first 12 matter. But again, you want to have all the things here starting on word boundaries, so when you store it, you may want to play with words, which again are like 32 bits rather than 8 bits. And so again, you'll have things where where each of the values is stored by taking where it starts, which is the previous field, where the previous field ended, plus 1. And where it ends, which you get by taking, for field 3, you take the third thing over here again, which is not hard to calculate. How do you find it? You know how long this is. You know how long this is in your implementation. And so you add the appropriate offsets with a -1, of course, since the third field is where it ends is going to be here. This is where the first field ends. This is where the second field ends. Just do the appropriate, calculation. And again, if you know C, this should all be relatively familiar with you. And you find where the value is by calculation. And you know where it starts, you know where it ends, therefore you know how long it is, therefore you can get the value. So you can end up playing with that. And again, warning, you do want to be able to play with word boundaries to be able to make all this stuff work. Question?
Oh yeah, two questions. One, when you add more fields, that section with no flags, that dynamically expands as well, or?
It doesn't dynamically expand. Remember, we're the database system. We're not on the outside taking advantage of what the database system does. We're on the inside, which means we have to store something that has the correct representation. Maybe where things were before, if it fits, maybe somewhere else, maybe even on a different page. So it doesn't happen automatically. Second question.
Yeah. Do we care about fragmentation? So like if like F1 is null, F3 is null, and then so on and so forth to the end of time, does it matter for performance that there is like fragmentation of like this is null, because we don't.
If things are null, you don't have to store anything. So for no field, you basically make the length. If field 3 is null, then field 3 ends the same place that field 2 ended. I mean, there's no point in having any actual value that's stored there. You don't store the null. What you do in this case is you have the null bit on, and you make field 3 end where field 2 is, because that way field 4 knows where to start processing.
So there's no point in like making at a certain point making everything contiguous, because it's so like split up.
There are lots of, everything is contiguous.
Okay.
In this representation. All the values that are real are contiguous. All the values that actually exist. The null values, you just don't store anything. But you do have to make sure that if field 3 is null, where field 3 ends is the same place where field 2 ended.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question, or did I answer? Okay, so just to show you the one on the bottom, which is used in practice and has some advantages, but I suggest that you just keep it simple and stick with the top one. But here's what's going on over here in the representation that you have on the bottom. Starts off exactly the same way. You know how many fields there are. You know what you have the null bits exactly as before. But the point is that you know from the catalog what the length of the fixed things is. So the idea is that there are some things that are fixed and some things that end up being variable. In this representation, field 1 is variable length and field 3 is variable length, but field 2 and field 4 are fixed length. Doesn't have to be that way, it's just an example. So field 2 and field 4 are fixed length. What do? What we're going to do is we're going to have fixed length stuff at the beginning of the record. There are two kinds of fixed length stuff. The fixed length stuff that describes the variable fields, and the fixed length stuff that describes the fixed length fields. What do I put as a fixed length field for something that is variable length? I put 2 values. Field 1, I'm going to put the length of field 1. It's a variable length thing. I have to say how long it is. And I'm going to tell you the offset that corresponds to in this case, the beginning of field 1. Beginning, in this case. So I tell you, field 1 begins over here. I've got an arrow. It's an offset, not a pointer. It's an offset from the base, a position in the record. It's an offset. This is where it starts. I know how long it is. Great, I can get the record. I know where it starts. I know how long it is. From the base, I add this value. This again is an offset. I know how long it is. I get the value. But what about field 2? All the field 2 values are going to have the same length. It's going to be something which is fixed character, 16, or it's an integer fixed size. So what am I going to do? I'll just put the value there. The value there has a fixed size. So there are 2 fixed size things that I'm storing. For something which is variable length, the fixed size information I'm storing is its length and its offset. Length and offset. That's fixed size. The variable size record is not fixed length, but having 2 fields, length and offset. You do have to always think about, do I use a small int or an int or something else in dealing with it, or a long int. But it's fixed size. For this course, you can probably just play with